What's up guys, Eric Vasquez here from teachmetodesign.com, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you how to create some cool explosive visual effects in Photoshop. In this lesson, as I mentioned in the intro, we're going to be creating some explosive visual effects. And here's a preview of kind of what we're going to be recreating today. So to start things off, let's go ahead and open up Photoshop and create a new document. And we're going to make it 1280 pixels wide by 720 pixels tall. You can leave the resolution to 300 or work a little bit smaller if you want, and then hit OK. Now the first thing we're going to do is make sure we have our default colors here set to black and white. And if that's not the case, you can simply press D on the keyboard to reset your defaults. Now with black set as my foreground color, I'm going to go ahead and hit the Alt, Option, and Delete keys on the keyboard to just fill the background with that solid black color. From here, I'm going to go ahead and press Command J or Control J if you're working on a PC to just make a copy of that layer. So you'll see now we just have those two layers. And from here, I'm going to come up to the Filter menu, and we're going to choose Render Fibers. Now this is kind of an interesting filter. It's kind of like a noise filter, but more, vertical, making these thread-looking shapes, or kind of like what a fiber would look like under a microscope, I guess. But to be honest, I haven't found a whole lot of uses for this filter other than some of the effects that I'm going to show you guys. But that doesn't mean necessarily that there aren't other ways to use this. But you want to play around with the variance and the strength a little bit until we get something like that. So we're going to do a variance of 25, a strength of around 30, and hit OK. And you'll see now we have our black and white fiber layer. So from here, the next thing we're going to do is come up to Blur, and we're going to choose Radial Blur. Now I like using this type of blur a lot because it actually creates some kind of cool effects. So you have a spin blur, which is basically just going to create this kind of radial looking effect. Even though this is not the one that we want to use for this effect. So we're actually going to come back. I just wanted to show that to you guys really quick. We're going to do the zoom option instead and crank up the amount to 100 and leave the quality to best. Now one thing worth mentioning here is that you can actually move this around. You can move your center point, and that will kind of designate the origin of your explosion effect. So let's say you want it on the bottom and you want all these rays kind of shooting upwards. You can just drag that center point down, or conversely, if you want the effect to originate from the top, you just grab your center point and move it up here to the middle. So you can kind of move this around until you get something you like, but for this example, we're going to be just kind of working from the middle here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK, and that will apply our zoom effect. The next thing that we're going to do is come down here to the adjustment layer icon, and we're going to add a levels adjustment. Now I just want to increase the contrast here, so I'm dragging the left slider in towards the middle, and I'm dragging the right hand side slider in towards the middle as well, and that's just going to boost this up a bit. The next thing I want to do is actually move my cursor between the levels adjustment and the layer while holding down the Alt Option key. And hopefully you guys can see this, but the arrow is kind of changing the cursor to what looks like a downward pointing arrow along with the square. So once we click that, all that's doing is actually creating a clipping mask. And for those of you guys who aren't familiar with clipping masks, it just means that this effect above the layer is only going to affect that layer that it's attached to, which is exactly what we want. So I'm just going to go ahead and name this Fibers, hit OK, and then I'm going to select both of these layers and drag them down to the new layer icon to make copies of them. Now from here I'm going to press Command or Control E if you're working on a PC to merge those two layers together, just so we have a copy of it on top. And I'm going to come up here to the mode and change it to screen. Now that's going to make it quite a bit brighter, which is okay. I'm just going to lower the opacity a little bit and make it somewhere around 50% for now. Alright, and then let's go ahead and select all of these layers, and then press Command J to copy all three of them, and once again Command E to merge them together. Now from here, I'm going to come up to the Filter menu, and we're just going to apply a regular Gaussian blur. And it can be a little bit lower, maybe around 7, between 6.4 and 7, something like that. Alright, and then I'm going to maybe change this one to overlay. So that's just going to give me a little bit more contrast here, which we want. So this one I will just call blurred, blurry, blur. Okay, and then I'm going to group these three by selecting all the layers while holding down the Shift key and pressing Command G to put them in a folder. Again, pretty much every time I say Command, it also means Control if you're on a PC, but I'm just going to call this Fibers for now. And then I'm going to press Command T on the keyboard to do a free transform, and I will hover the cursor over the top right corner, but you can move it over any of these handles here. And then we're going to hold down Shift and Option and just expand it a little bit. So all that's doing is kind of scaling this up from the center. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. So I want to come down here to the adjustment layer icon once again and apply another levels adjustment. And this is going to affect everything below this layer, so something like that. We're going to push it pretty far, so we crunch this in quite a bit. And then what we're going to do is just throw this into the folder here. Alright, so now it's all contained in our fiber layer. And from here, I'm going to create a new layer and press G on the keyboard to get my gradient tool. Now from here, you can see on the top, I'm selecting the radial gradient option. And I want to have a gradient that fades from solid to transparent like this. And you can see here it's got that little checkerboard pattern that just means that it's transparent. Hit OK. But the problem is we don't want it to go from black to transparent. We want it to be white to transparent. So you can just press X on the keyboard to toggle back and forth between your foreground and background colors until you have white. Or you can go ahead and click these little arrows here. Now we want to find roughly the center. So I'm just going to move my cursor in here and then click and drag outwards. That is not right at all because I had the reverse option checked off. So make sure you don't have that checked off. Otherwise, you're going to end up with kind of the opposite of what we want. We actually want the white in the middle and then transparent on the outside as opposed to what I did before, which was the exact opposite. So I'm going to create that radial gradient and maybe reduce the opacity a little bit to, let's say 70 or 80%. And then from there, make another copy by pressing Command J, and we'll change the blending mode of this layer to overlay. So now we have this highlight kind of radiating from the center of our fiber explosion layer. I'm going to put both of these layers in another group folder just to keep things organized, and we will just call it, radial gradient. And now we can start to add a little bit of color to this. So I like to kind of build this up in black and white and then add my color after, just to have more control over it. So we're going to come down here to the adjustment layer icon at the bottom of the layers palette, and we're going to choose gradient map. Now by default, you'll probably have something like this because it's just using your foreground colors. But we want to add a little bit of color to this. So we're going to click on this first slider here and maybe start off with like a dark kind of red. Then we're going to click to make another color swatch here, and we can make it kind of a reddish orange. And this is basically just overlaying a map of color on top of whatever you have. So I'm going to take the black slider out and maybe move this one over a little bit just to create that kind of fiery explosive effect that we're going for. Something like that looks pretty good, I think. So go ahead and hit OK. One other benefit of using these adjustment layers and gradient maps in particular is that you can always come back to your properties and modify these colors, play around with the sliders some more if you want, just to come back and change it up. So let's keep moving forward. Our effect is already starting to look pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and create another new layer, and this time come up to the filter menu, and we're going to add some render clouds. Just add these clouds by default. You can maybe invert them if you want by pressing Command and I to get a slightly different look. And from there, we're going to change the blending mode to screen. Add another levels adjustment layer so that we can crunch the contrast. But this time, instead of hovering the cursor in between the two layers to create a clipping mask, I'm going to show you guys another way to do it. So before you even click on the adjustment layer icon, hold down the Alt and Option key, and then go ahead and click. Choose Levels. And this time, you'll get a dialog box here that asks you if you want to use previous layer to create a clipping mask, which we do. Check that off and hit OK. And now you'll see the clipping mask is attached to our cloud layer. So let's go ahead and name that clouds. And now we come to our levels adjustment, and we can kind of crunch that in again to get some more contrast out of this, like that. Okay? Now I want to blur these clouds a little bit, so I'm going to come up to Filter, Blur, and just do a Gaussian blur. I want to crank it up somewhere around there, somewhere around 40, 43, just to get a little more texture without, having any hard edges or lines or anything like that. I think will look pretty good. And I'm also just playing around with the blending modes a little bit, maybe color dodge, screen. I don't really want, the white showing up so much, so I'm thinking something like color dodge might actually look pretty cool. I'm going to keep going here, and the next thing I want to do is actually add a little bit of a vignette. So we want to darken the edges to keep the focal point in the center of our image. So before I do that, I want to find the exact center of this composition. I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm just going to fill it with white, black, doesn't matter. You just want to have something that covers the whole canvas. Also make sure that you have your rulers showing up by pressing Command or Control R. And then with your solid fill layer selected, press Command T on the keyboard, and that's going to initiate the free transform command. From here you'll see that you have these handles, and I like to use these handles to help me find the center of my image because I can just drag out these guides from the rulers and it will kind of snap into place. Now if your guides aren't showing up like mine weren't, you can just press Command or Control and the semicolon, and that will turn your guides on and off. Or you can come up here to the View menu and make sure that you have your extras showing and your snap checked off as well. Alright, so now that we have the center of our image, we don't really need this layer anymore. I just kind of do that to help me as a guide. So once I apply that, I can see that our effect is a little bit off center here. So what I want to do actually is grab these fibers, and I'm going to grab the whole folder, just kind of shift it over a little bit. And you know what? Let's just leave it for now. I'm going to keep going, and we can always fix it at the end. So just create a new layer, and I'm going to come back to my gradient tool by pressing G on the keyboard. And this time we actually do want to use a black gradient, and we will want to check off this reverse option. And you should still have the solid to transparent option checked off. So this time when we click in the center and drag outwards to any of the four corners, instead of having a gradient in the middle that fades to transparent, we have transparent fading to solid black. So this is going to give us our nice vignette effect. Go ahead and press Command T once again, and then drag outwards from any of the four corners while holding down Shift and Option on the keyboard. Now that will just extend it a little bit, and we can try to maybe set it to multiply, overlay, or I'm just going to leave it on normal for now and just reduce the opacity a little bit to, let's say, like 75%. And you can always come back in and play around with the size depending on how dark you want the edges to be. Oops. Okay, so here's how we're looking so far. Not too bad. Just going to name this layer Vignette, and then create another new layer and fill it with solid black. Now this time we're going to create a little more texture by coming up to Filter, Noise, Add Noise, and you want to check off Uniform and Monochromatic from the menu and just crank the amount up to maybe around 200 and then hit OK. So from here we're going to change the blending mode to screen so that we have only this white that is showing, and we're going to apply another radial blur. This time it'll be much less extreme. Maybe we'll keep the amount down to around 14 or 15%, still using zoom and a quality of best. Okay, so that gives you another kind of layer, but you can still see some of the nice texture in there from the noise. Alright, I'm just going to maybe switch this over to overlay for now, and then do a free transform and make it a little bit bigger. Okay, and I'm also going to lower the opacity to around 30% for now just by pressing the number 3 on the keypad. And then we're going to rename this layer Noise. From here we want to add some text to this. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead, create a new layer, and then select my text tool over here in the toolbar, or you can just press T on the keyboard. Type out the word explode, which I know is very literal, but it kind of makes sense for what we're doing, so I think it will be okay. Alright, and what I'm doing here is just modifying the tracking or the spacing between each of these characters. And the shortcut to do that is to first double click and select your text, and then use the left and right arrows while holding down the Alt Option key. The left arrow will decrease the tracking or the amount of space in between the letters, and the right arrow will increase the space. For this, I'm just going to stick with Avenir Heavy. I think that's kind of a default typeface that most of you guys should have. But any kind of bold typeface will work. So now that we have our text here, we want to dress it up a little bit. We don't just want this plain black text, but we also want to create kind of a little bit of a depth effect here as well. The way that we're going to do that, and this kind of is a bit of a riff off of a previous tutorial that I've done on using Smart PSDs, is that we're going to convert this to a smart object. So select your text layer, click on it while holding Control, and then choose Convert to Smart Object. Now this will serve as our main text layer, but we also want to create a copy of it so that we can create an extrusion. So go ahead and press Command J on the keyboard, and then just move that layer down once by pressing Command and the left bracket. In order to create that extruded effect, we want to make this text updatable. So this is basically the same technique as I mentioned that I use in my Smart PSD tutorial. Basically what we're going to do is select our actions, which you can also get by coming up to Window, Actions, or it's the one that looks like a little play button over here. Now I've got a few of these created already, but I will show you guys how to do this right now. So click down here on the Create New Action button, and let's just call it, Extrude. Even though I've got a bunch of those already, we'll call it Extrude Test, and then hit Record. Now, it's going to record our steps, so we're going to press Command J to make a copy, then Command in the left bracket to move it down once, and then Command T to initiate a free transform. Now up here on the top toolbar, you'll see you have a width and a height of 100%. But we want it so that each time we press play on this, it's going to decrease in size from the center by about 5%, or 0.5% rather. So we're going to change width and height to 99.5, then hit Enter on the keyboard, and then we're just going to stop our action. So that's it. That's all there is to it. That's all you have to do. And then from there, with your Explode Copy To layer selected, we can just go ahead and play this over and over and over to your heart's content. Basically, the more that you play it, the longer your extrusion is going to be. So we'll probably end up with around 24 copies or so. And then we can just select that very bottom layer, hold down the Shift key, and select the first copy just below our original text, and then press Command G to put it into a group folder. Name this folder Extrusion. The cool thing about this is if I were to double click this smart object and change the text in here, it would update in our main file. So let's just try something else like debris. Alright, and if I save it, you'll see it's now updated here, and it's updated all of the copies of our extrusion as well, which is great. Alright, so that's a really good way to kind of create this effect. So what I'm going to do now is double click on the Explode Smart Object layer, and I'm going to add a stroke on the outside and make it about 3 pixels. Now I don't want a fill color, I actually want a gradient, and I'm going to change it from this black and white gradient here to selecting some of these colors from our background so that it just picks up some of this reflected light, and it'll create a bit of a cooler looking gradient here for us. I'm just creating and adding these additional colors and kind of sampling from the background, just using the eyedropper and playing around a little bit. Feel free to experiment with the colors. You want to get some different values in here, some dark next to light, light next to dark, and then hit OK. See how that looks. And we want to change the angle to 90. So I'm wondering if you can play around with reversing it or leaving it as it is, but I don't want to have so many bright colors. You kind of want maybe just 1 or 2 areas where you have a little bit of a highlight. And you can also move these closer together to create more of a sudden kind of change here in your color variation. Alright, so again, I'm just going to continue playing with this for a couple more seconds and maybe adding a little bit more of a darker color here on the bottom. Okay, and just kind of seeing how it looks, feeling it out. Maybe I want to take that out altogether, or just make it slightly darker. All right, but the goal is to kind of create that highlight effect, and this should probably be closer to the top, so maybe something around there. Okay, and then let's see how this looks by adding a little more. Dark, light, dark is kind of the pattern that you're seeing here, and I'm just gonna mess with that, something like that. Okay, so you've got light, dark, and then maybe one or two areas of brighter colors. So hit OK to apply that, and now we're actually going to apply some layer styles to our extrusion folder. Come in here, and I'm gonna once again just check off gradient overlay, but we're going to change it from black and white to just sampling a couple of colors from the background, not as much as we did for our stroke, but just a couple here to get some variation. I'm going to add a new color in, move it around a little bit and see how that looks. And it's okay, to leave these a little bit darker because we're actually going to add some lights and overlays and things like that that are really going to brighten this up and give it a bit of a punch. You don't have to go too crazy with it. But one other thing that we're going to apply here is the bevel and emboss. And we're going to set it to inner bevel, smooth, and maybe play around with the size, okay? And one thing to point out here is the screen, like the highlights and the shadow modes. You can control the opacity, and you can also control, maybe you want it on overlay, and you can change it from white to an actual color. So I want to try to keep it as close to that as I can, and play around with the opacity a little bit here as well. And this is kind of cool because it just adds a little bit more depth and a little bit more value to your text. Something around there I think looks pretty good. And then we're just going to go ahead and hit OK. So I have a depth of 584, direction, I think down actually looks a little bit better. We'll leave it on down, size of 35, soften 0, and you guys can see the rest of these settings that I'm using here. So once you're happy with that, go ahead and hit OK. And now we have our extruded text. So one thing that I want to see really quick is if we bring our noise to the top of the layer stack, we'll actually see some of that texture in the extrusion. Okay, so we're just going to come back here, leave the noise on top, and that will help tie it together with the background a little bit. In order to push that even further, select the vignette layer, create a new layer in between the vignette and the extruded group folder, and then once again grab my gradient tool, radial gradient, make sure that reverse is not checked, and we can eyeball it. We're just going to click and drag from the center to create a white gradient. Now from here I'm going to change the blending mode once again to overlay, or maybe even soft light, to kind of blow out the center of the image to make that explosion look really bright. I'm going to shrink this one down a little bit and just kind of move it a little bit off center to some of these other corners. And you'll see that it kind of helps our text pop out a little bit as well, just by creating a couple of hot spots. Alright, so maybe one more. You don't have to go crazy. You can kind of experiment with the placement of these until you find something that you like. You just want to add a little bit more variation here to the light and everything like that, so it doesn't look so uniform. So we've got about 7 or 8 of these. I'm just going to select them all while holding the Shift key, throw them into a group folder, and we will call them overlays. You guys don't have to do all this stuff, with organizing and folders and things like that, but it's something that I think, is a good habit to get into because it just keeps things really organized and easy. You don't have to spend too much time just poking around and looking for the layers that you want, especially once you start building out these kind of files that can get a little crazy very quickly. Everything's nice and organized, easy for us to find what we need, and then we can just continue on. So the last thing that I want to do here is add a few more lights in the front to help tie our text together with the background. And in order to do that, I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer, come back to the gradient tool, the radial gradient, and instead of using white for a white to transparent gradient, I'm actually now going to hold down the Alt key, and that will toggle between my cursor and the eyedropper. And I'm going to sample some of these colors from the background here so that we can use existing colors from our composition. Before I do that, I actually noticed that the extrusion here looks a little bit like it's not lining up the way we want with our front text, and I think I know why. So before I get into that, guys, sorry, I'm just going to come back to the text, double click it to bring up the Layer Styles dialog box, and I think it's our stroke that is causing this problem. We're going to change it from position outside to inside, and there we go. I think that kind of looks a little bit better. You can see the edges match up a little bit better that way, so I'm just going to leave it like that and hit OK. Select a color from the background, click and drag outwards, and we have this kind of like vibrant orange color. And I'm going to change the blending mode to, let's see, linear dodge. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I'm going to press Command J to make a copy of it and kind of move it over some of the darker areas of the text, just to add some, some variation to the black text in front here. And then we're just going to, move that around a little bit into a position that we like. And you can also use, other colors too. You don't have to use just this orange. Maybe you want to select some of this yellow or red. All right, and play around with the blending modes a little bit. I tend to use linear dodge and screen for this kind of effect, but feel free to play around. Also, it's a good idea to experiment with the size a little bit. And if you do use a color that you're not happy with, you can always apply a hue saturation adjustment to modify it. So the way that I can do that really quickly is by pressing Command Option U on the keyboard, and then that'll bring this up. So you want to keep the saturation pretty high, but you can just move this slider around to get other variations of color. So if you wanted to make it more orange, more red, blue, even though that doesn't really fit, you can do that really quickly and easily. And you can see your changes by checking and unchecking the preview here. Alright, so go ahead and hit OK once you're happy with that. This is basically the effect. So I'm just going to add these to a group folder of its own and call it, highlights. So it's pretty cool. You guys don't have to use text. You can just have this in a background. It would look pretty good in like an action scene or any kind of digital art that you wanted to add this effect to. Remember that you can have this explosion originate from anywhere in your composition. We did it from the middle, but you can always have it come from another point if you want to. Alright, so now that we have everything kind of set up here, we can just make some a few more tweaks. So maybe we want to lower the opacity of this vignette a little bit. You can just select the folder, press the numbers on your keyboard to go by increments of 10. So by pressing 5, 50%, 6 is 60%, and so forth. Come up to our top folder here of highlights, and then we will apply a curves adjustment layer. Now from there, I'm going to move this middle point up a little bit to make the whole image a little brighter, and just get a little bit more contrast out of it like this. Okay, with something like that, you can see how it looks. It kind of brightens up the image overall. And then we're going to also add a hue saturation adjustment. Doing this just to kind of tweak the colors a little bit more. You can just move around the hue slider and get some kind of crazy results. Increase the saturation or decrease it, and just kind of see how that looks. We're not going to do anything too drastic. I just wanted to do a slight shift here to try and get our explosion to look a little bit hotter. One other thing is I'm actually going to come back and modify our gradient map here. I think I want to make, add a little bit of a lighter color here, like a pale yellow, and just kind of see how this looks in our gradient map. All right, I think that's kind of cool, just adding a little bit more detail into the image. So let's see here. What happens if I take that out? Yeah, I'm actually going to take out that saturated yellow that I had before and replace it with this slightly less saturated pale color. Now that we have a few adjustments on top, we've modified our gradient map. I think we are looking pretty good. I'm also going to experiment a little bit with the size of the text. Something like that. that's pretty much it, guys. So that's basically the effect. That's the gist of it. And adding the lights and everything just ties it together with her background, and it looks pretty cool. I hope that you guys have enjoyed this tutorial. If so, be sure to go ahead and sign up for our email list and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Also give us a thumbs up and check us out on Facebook and teachmetodesign.com. Thanks for your support, guys. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.